Today, I will tell you about a family tragedy that led to incredibly heartbreaking events and ended in an unending cycle of revenge. On March 17, 2002, in the Pedras Redondas neighborhood of Almeria, Spain, there was a 7-year-old Romanian girl named Montserrat. Montserrat was known as a sweet and well-behaved girl, beloved by everyone in the neighborhood. On a beautiful day, Montserrat and her mother, Hina, went to a cousin's birthday party. However, plans changed at the last minute, and the mother had to leave in a hurry. Before leaving, she instructed Montserrat to stay at her aunt and uncle's house and that she would return in 3 hours. However, Montserrat did not listen and got carried away playing. 2 hours later, perhaps bored, Montserrat asked for permission to go to her grandmother's house, which was only a few steps away. After about an hour at her grandmother's house, she was allowed to go home. On the way, she met a close relative with whom she decided to play. When her mother returned to pick her up at the party, she learned that Montserrat had gone to her grandmother's house. The mother searched for her daughter there and at their home but found no trace of Montserrat. Panic-stricken, she called her husband to help search for their daughter. Despite the assistance of neighbors, they found no sign of Montserrat. The father insisted that their daughter had been kidnapped and reported it to the police. The police concluded that this was a kidnapping and began their investigation by interviewing witnesses. However, no one saw the girl after she left her grandmother's house. The police believed this to be an organized crime, as it would be difficult to abduct her without anyone noticing in such a bustling neighborhood. At 1:45 p.m., 2 neighbors discovered a cardboard box by the roadside. Feeling uneasy, they opened the box to find a body and a severed head wrapped in clothes. Based on the hair color and part of the face, the parents confirmed it was Montserrat. Witnesses stated they had passed through the area several times but had not seen the box earlier. The police concluded that the perpetrator might be one of the search participants, waiting for the right moment to dispose of the box. All traces had been meticulously erased, leaving no fingerprints or DNA evidence. The autopsy revealed that Montserrat had multiple severe injuries and burns covering 80% of her body from acid. Horrifically, she suffered these injuries while still alive before being killed by a blow to the head. The time of death was estimated to be between 8 and 11 p.m. The detectives concluded that the perpetrator might have had accomplices, as the level of brutality and the method of disposing of the body suggested careful planning. Montserrat had not been sexually assaulted, and the torture marks and the conspicuous placement of the box led the police to suspect a revenge killing. The victim's family did not believe this theory, as they lived in a very peaceful town where everyone was friendly and loved their family. Moreover, they had no enemies that could have led to such an atrocity. The parents insisted they had no enemies, leaving the police with no leads to narrow down the suspects. They had to follow the trail of the seller of the box, hoping to trace who bought it. The box used to store the body appeared to be new, making it feasible to find where it was sold. After hours of searching, they found a store. The shop owner stated that a man around 40 years old named Antonio Santiago had bought a table there about 4 weeks earlier, which came in a box identical to the one at the crime scene. Antonio was identified as a relative of Francisco Vado, the victim's father. He lived just a few kilometers from the crime scene. Regarding his background, Antonio lived in poverty with his wife and 2 children. Antonio epitomized the saying, "When it rains, it pours." In the 1980s, he fought for the Spanish army but unfortunately had an accident during training that resulted in brain injury and a slight disability in his left hand. All these factors, combined with his low education, meant Antonio could only do manual labor for a meager wage. His wife, Juana Santiago, had a part-time job but primarily stayed home to take care of their 2 children. Antonio was described as a sullen and quiet man who frequently argued with his wife. The primary cause of these arguments was his habit of using his disability allowance to support his mother and aunt rather than caring for his own family. His wife, Juana, was known to be competitive and had an inflated sense of self-importance. These descriptions explain why their neighbors did not like them. After identifying Antonio as the prime suspect, the police obtained a search warrant for his house and began surveillance on the family. On March 19th, after receiving the search warrant, the police also issued a summons for Antonio. However, he never got to answer any police questions because he hanged himself from a tree near where Montserrat's body had been found. He was discovered at 12:30 p.m. by a group of students walking along that road. Interestingly, there was a bag of about 500 grams of salt beneath his feet, a custom in Romanian culture symbolizing that justice had been served. Juana stated that her husband had gone out to buy cigarettes but did not return for several hours. She sought help from her aunt, Emma, to search for him, but no one was available because everyone was attending Montserrat's funeral. Similarly to the first case, the police questioned the locals, but no one had seen Antonio hang himself. The autopsy found no signs of struggle or injury and no traces of drugs or hallucinogens in his system. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to lack of oxygen to the brain. Investigators theorized that Antonio committed suicide out of guilt and the pressure of the ongoing police investigation, seeing no other escape than ending his own life. The news of the two murders spread among the neighbors. They were outraged, not only because he had taken a child's life but also because he had escaped, leaving his family without support. However, the case did not end there. Although the prime suspect had committed suicide, the possibility of Juana's involvement couldn't be ruled out. The police decided to search Antonio's house to uncover the full story. Upon entering the house, the investigators were greeted by a strong smell of cleaning chemicals. The house, although moldy, was inexplicably neat and clean as if it had been prepped for the investigation. On the second floor, the smell of sulfuric acid and rotting flesh overpowered the chemical scent, forcing the police to step outside for fresh air every 5 minutes. Here, they found critical evidence: half a bottle of the same acid used on Montserrat, a sofa cover matching the fabric wrapping the victim, 5 bags of blood-stained clothes, including Montserrat's pre-murder clothes. Blood was also found in the front yard, on a second-floor lock, and in the bathtub. Tests confirmed the blood was Montserrat's. The police confiscated a chair, the box, a pair of rubber gloves, and the 11-year-old daughter's stuffed animal for further evidence, but none yielded results. The murder weapon was still missing. However, on the second-floor balcony, they found 5 different shoe prints belonging to Juana, Antonio, Montserrat, and 2 unidentified people. Juana had cuts and burns on her right arm, and left leg, likely sustained during the crime. A solvent extracted from Juana's fingernails matched the solution found on Montserrat's body, leading to Juana's arrest. With Juana now the main suspect, the police continued their investigation. A neighbor admitted seeing Montserrat with Juana at a public square at 6:40 p.m. on March 7th. Neighbors reported loud music, shouting, and Maria crying from Antonio's house. Francisco, Montserrat's father, had also inquired about his daughter there but was told she was not seen. On the morning of March 8th, neighbors saw Juana, her daughter Maria, and Juana's sister Ingracia Santiago looking around suspiciously. 15 minutes later, Juana stepped outside to smoke, appearing tense and guilty. She behaved suspiciously, leaving Montserrat's funeral early to borrow a car for dumping trash and taking her daughter to a doctor's appointment. She returned the car only after the funeral ended, having taken Maria to a hospital 40 minutes away instead of the usual one. The police hypothesized that Maria had lured Montserrat to their house, where Antonio killed her. Juana borrowed the car to dispose of the victim's clothes, and Ingracia and another unidentified man were likely accomplices. However, the weapon had decomposed, preventing identification. The police had to pressure and threaten Juana for a confession. Juana's interrogation was challenging. She changed her testimony 5 times, offering 3 different versions. On March 21st, Juana claimed she and her daughter met Montserrat and took her home, where Juana and Antonio committed the crime. Ingracia arrived to find drugs and joined them, delivering the fatal blow and pouring acid on Montserrat to ensure her death. Antonio disposed of the body while Juana got rid of the clothes but refused to reveal the weapon's location. On March 30th, Juana changed her story. She claimed that she and Ingracia only watched Antonio torment the child. Too terrified to intervene, fearing for her family's lives, Juana cleaned up under Antonio's threats. 9 months later, with the weapon still missing, Juana changed her story again. She said the family had visited her mother-in-law's house while their neighbors celebrated Montserrat's cousin's birthday. Antonio left early, and Juana and Maria stayed until 8 p.m. They then went to Ingracia's house, staying until midnight. On their way home, they encountered the search for Montserrat and were unaware of her disappearance. Juana's decreasing involvement in each testimony and her final account conflicting with witness statements indicated she was lying. The police let her continue her story. Returning home, Juana claimed to find Montserrat tied up, Antonio frenzied. After killing Montserrat, Antonio confessed to the murder. Fernandez, Ingracia's husband, handed Antonio acid while Ingracia watched. Juana, attempting to stop the crime, was burned by Antonio. She professed deep remorse for Montserrat's death. During the investigation, Fernandez, Ingracia, and Juana had no opportunity to communicate, leading to conflicting stories. Ingracia denied involvement, saying she had only delivered drugs and learned of Montserrat's disappearance from neighbors, joining the search until 1 a.m. Fernandez disputed this, claiming they visited their eldest son until late, but this was unverified as their son wasn't home that night. Realizing that these individuals seemed suspicious, the police decided to expand the investigation to their home. The investigators found a roll of duct tape and a bottle of acid solution that matched the type used on the victim. Ingratia's shoes also matched the prints found at Juana's house, but the prints of the other man did not match Fernandez. Lacking concrete evidence to confirm whether the unknown man was Fernandez, the only way to find out was to ask Maria. However, Maria was still traumatized by what she had witnessed, so the police could not gather any additional information from her. After 8 months of psychological treatment, Maria was finally ready to give her testimony. On the day of the murder, Maria was at home with the 4 aforementioned individuals. Ingratia and Fernandez had tied the victim to a pole, and Juana continuously assaulted the girl. While the 3 of them were brutally torturing Montserrat, Antonio sat silently, gagged to prevent any noise. The torture continued until Juana poured acid on Montserrat. Perhaps because she stood too close to the victim and wasn't wearing gloves, some acid splashed onto her hands and legs. Witnessing this scene, Maria could not bear it and ran into her room to cry. When Maria finally had the courage to leave her room, the victim was already dead. She saw her parents cleaning up the crime scene, discarding Montserrat's blood-stained clothes and throwing them in the trash. Maria's testimony matched Juana's first confession, leading to Fernandez being arrested in December. This crime outraged the local community. They protested and demanded harsh punishment for everyone involved. But Montserrat's father, Francisco, couldn't wait for justice to be served and sought revenge outside the law. Francisco had been monitoring and recording the habits of Juana's eldest son, Antonio Fernandez Santiago, who was unaware of the whole incident. When he learned that Santiago was planning to go to the city of Ciudad Almeria, Francisco followed him along with a 17-year-old girl. He bought a revolver, intending to assassinate Santiago. The gunshots alarmed the town. Santiago was very frightened but managed to call the police. Fortunately, a patrol officer was nearby, so he was saved. Francisco was sentenced to 7 years in prison for attempted murder, while the 17-year-old girl was sent to a juvenile detention center. Realizing this case had escalated out of control, the police wanted to close it as soon as possible. However, they faced a challenge when it came to questioning the motive behind the murder. Ingratia and Fernandez consistently claimed innocence, while Juana remained silent about the motive. According to Montserrat's grandfather, the motive might have stemmed from jealousy, as there was no deep-seated hatred between the families. The victim's family was well respected and beloved in the neighborhood, especially their daughter, while Maria was shy and reserved. Notably, Montserrat had a history of bullying Maria at school. After such incidents, Maria would come home and complain to her parents, but due to their impoverished conditions and lack of connections, they couldn't do anything. Other theories suggested that Montserrat was a sacrificial offering by Juana to the gods, as she often engaged in dubious spiritual activities. However, this theory was quickly dismissed due to more credible witnesses supporting the personal vendetta and financial issues theory. In 2000, Ingratia and Fernandez had borrowed 150,000 pesos from the victim's grandparents and only managed to repay it 2 weeks before Montserrat was murdered. But before that, they had repeatedly refused to repay the debt, thinking the family was wealthy and the amount insignificant. After numerous public arguments and even threats to kill each other's children, tensions escalated. Yet, no conclusion could be drawn as none of the involved parties were willing to tell the truth. The final trial took place on October 10, 2005. Besides the defendants and the plaintiffs, 56 witnesses and 13 jurors were present. The prosecution presented the following theory of the events. Antonio and Juana went to the square to pick up Maria and saw Montserrat there, so they lured her home. Seeing this as a good opportunity to vent their anger on the victim, they tied her to a post on the 2nd floor and tortured her. The sisters couple either were called over or happened to come by and decided to join in the crime. Antonio, however, had no involvement and just sat there silently. Due to a history of brain injury and bullying issues, he was forced to help his wife cover up the crime. Feeling guilty but unable to betray his wife, he chose to commit suicide. For the defense, Juana did something incredibly foolish. She retracted all her previous statements and claimed she had no involvement in the incident, then fabricated an entirely new story. She said she wasn't home that night, and the sisters couple did not visit. When she got home, Antonio threatened to kill her if she didn't keep quiet and help him hide the body. These lies, of course, didn't fool the judge, but she was still declared guilty. At that moment, Juana broke down and said, "I wasn't the only one in the house. If I have to pay, no one will escape punishment." This outburst led to her confessing to the murder and implicating her accomplices. In October 2005, Juana Santiago, Ingracia Santiago, and Antonio Fernandez were sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to pay 150,000 pesos in compensation. Kakina, the victim's mother, shouted in joy, saying that justice had been served. The case concluded with 2 injuries and 4 people imprisoned. Montserrat's family, once a happy place full of joy, laughter, and love from everyone around, was now a scene of sorrow for the grieving mother. Fortunately, the heinous criminals received their deserved punishment. Francisco and Hina would reunite after 7 years, but little Montserrat was gone forever. The grudges of adults ultimately cost the life of a child. One must wonder, what wrong did these children do? This story clearly shows that the grudges of adults were paid with the life of an innocent child. Tragically, Montserrat is gone forever. Meanwhile, the adults responsible for this tragedy finally faced justice, but the price of hatred and envy was too high. This is a painful reminder of the consequences of violence and hatred. Hopefully, this story will remind us of the importance of kindness and compassion so that such tragedies do not happen again.